Hello my quilting friends! My name is Leah Day, and in this video we are loading our quilt on the frame, getting ready for pantograph quilting. The first step is to install your backing fabric, and this is a video specific to a rolling rail style frame. This is when the rails roll and allow you to roll the quilt up onto the frame. This is different from a hoop frame. I have another video. I will make sure to link it up so you can learn how to load your hoop frame in a different way. So I have put my backing fabric here, and I am actually attaching it to my leader cloth using red snappers. I also have another video on how to use red snappers too, and this speeds up your loading process. It's a clamping system that allows you to attach your backing fabric to your leader cloth in a matter of minutes. I did not realize how much time I was losing penning my backing fabric to my leaders until I did that. I kind of timed myself on it. I realized I was losing about 45 minutes to an hour on my bigger quilts. That's why I love my red snappers. Okay, so this is all nicely loaded. Now I'm gonna roll up the backing fabric all the way up and going ahead and clamp to the front rail. That way the backing fabric is clamped to both sides. So I layer on my batting on top of the backing fabric, and I also attach my side clamps before I baste stitch the batting to the backing. I do the side clamps because I find as I'm stitching across, the sides of the backing fabric like to pull inward. So I just find that attaching the side clamps now is definitely part of my process. So now that this has stitched in place, it's time to layer on my quilt top. So I'm just layering this in place, making sure that it's lined up where I have about a 1/4 inch over that line of basting stitches that I used to attach my backing fabric. Now you can use channel locks, and that's what I typically would use, but right now I'm just pushing the long arm as far back as it can go. That's giving me a nice straight line. I'll click on the machine, and I'm just using that basting stitch, and my backing immediately started pulling because I had not attached these side clamps again. So if you see something weird going on, something out of the usual, something doesn't feel quite right, it usually means that's not. And I also have this dowel rod. Now the clamps are useful. They really work great, but I always have my ruler base here attached to my long arm. The downside of the ruler base is it likes to connect with those side clamps and stop my long arm from moving on the frame. So in order to stop those two things from crashing together, I take this dowel rod, slot it up like that, completely keeps these clamps up and out of the way. So again, fun little things like that that just end up working out. You kind of pick up on them and think about, if you start having a struggle or a problem, well, what's going to fix it? What's a simple solution? So right now, all I'm doing is just baste stitching across, keeping that edge of the quilt top nice and straight, smoothing it out as I go. And then every once in a while, I'll click the long arm off and just smooth things out this way. Notice that this is not super cranked down tight. It's bouncy tight is what I like to call it. If you get a quilt on your frame too tight, you're not going to stitch well on it. And after you finish quilting it, the whole thing is going to end up having some tension issues. Might look like a shriveled raisin a little bit because you've over tightened it. So bouncy tight is what we're going for. Now normally I would be done loading my frame at this stage. I stitched my batting in place, I stitched my quilt top in place, we're ready to start quilting. If I'm quilting from the front and I've got my eyes on the quilt top. But when we're quilting with pantographs, our eyes are not on the quilt top. Our eyes are on our pantograph design. This is on our back table, and we're following that design with our laser light. For that reason, it's really easy to stitch things like pleats into your quilt. It's really easy for that foot to hit the edge of the quilt and flip it over and just make a total mess. So for that reason, I do a lot more based quilting, basically putting the 3 layers of the quilt together on the frame, and I do that before I start pantograph quilting. I stitch it down all the way to the end of the quilt, getting all 3 layers secured together, and most especially those sides stitched. And this is really important, guys. I can't emphasize it enough. It only takes 1 pantograph for you to stitch and put some pleats in those sides before you learn. It saves time to do this base stitching, trust me. So how am I going to do this? I have stopped with my needle in the down position. I am right on the corner of the quilt. I am going to lock my channel lock, and this is the lock that locks the machine so it only can stitch forward and back. It can't stitch side to side. And what this is going to allow me to do is stitch the edge of the quilt nice and straight so that I know that the quilt is coming out and on the frame straight and square. Now you'll see me sliding the edge of the quilt over. I'm just making sure that I have the same amount of the quilt lined up as I stitch it down, making sure it's staying nice and straight. Every once in a while, I give it a little bit of a nudge. Okay, now I'm going to stop with my needle in the down position, and I have quilted to the point where my machine is hitting the front rail. I'm bottoming out, so now I'm going to walk all the way back around the frame, unlock that channel lock, and be able to stitch across. Now, stitching that bottom edge, basting those layers together. Now if you have seam lines in your quilt and you have lined up with the seam line, you want to make sure that you stay consistent with that seam line all the way across. So if you are exactly on that edge at the beginning, then you should be exactly on that edge at the end. Keep that in mind. This is just good practice for staying straight and square on your frame. All right, I'm going to stop right there. Needle in the down position. Let's lock our channel lock again. And we'll stitch straight up. Now there are lots of different names. Sometimes companies will call them carriage locks, not channel locks. So just understand it's all the same thing. If it locks your machine in one direction or the other, it's the same thing. Now I'm quilting on a Unique 21 long arm, so I have a lot of space between that first line of basting stitches and this bottom line of basting stitches. If I'm working on something super special, I will run another straight line of basting stitches right through the middle, and I'll use the channel lock on my long arm that locks the machine so that it can only roll side to side. Now for your next row, you're going to do the exact same thing. Stitch down the side, stitch across, stitch up the other side. Now for this particular quilt, which is about 50 inches wide, this is the method that I am using. But if I was working on a wider quilt, I might end up basting my next line starting from the middle and stitching to the left and then up the side, stitching from the right and then up the side. So understand, depending upon the size of your project, you may have to alter how you baste your quilt on your frame. The number one key though is baste down those sides because you don't want the quilt to shift inward as you quilt across with your design. So that's it for this video on loading your frame for Pantograph quilting. If you'd like to learn more, come and check out the Pantograph Quilting Guidebook and the Pantographs I have designed. You can find them all linked up together at leahday.com/panto. Until next time, let's go quilt.